Hey everybody, happy Wednesday. Welcome to show number 8 of the Creative Quarantine Sessions. Before we begin, I want to give a shout out, as always, to our technical director, Mr. Alan Delinka, the man behind the curtain making the magic, and our composer, Nathan Abakian. Thank you both. Before we bring out our very special production designer friend today, I'd like to bring back my co-host, Miss Caryn Novak. Welcome back, Caryn.
Thanks, Alex. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're honored to have Jeannine with us today. She's so inspiring, and we can't wait to hear the stories from her incredible career.
Indeed. So let's not waste any more time. To give you a brief introduction, Jeannine Oppewall has served as production designer for over 40 films and television programs. She's garnered 4 Oscar nominations for her designs of LA Confidential, Pleasantville, Seabiscuit, and The Good Shepherd. Other career highlights include films Catch Me If You Can, Wonder Boys, Rules Don't Apply, Snow Falling on Cedars, and The Bridges of Madison County. Oppewall's first film was Paul Schrader's Blue Collar in 1978. Tender Mercies in 1983, starring Robert Duvall, was her earliest picture as a production designer and remains one of her favorites. She began her career working for the office of Charles and Ray Eames, known for the influential furniture designs, where she helped organize and design museum exhibits among many other artful assignments. She is a recent recipient of the Art Directors Guild Lifetime Achievement Award. Jeannine once said, "Architects who come to this world of production design often miss the essence of imagining the lives of the characters and get caught up in what moldings they should be using. It's not about the bloody moldings. It's about the emotion of a place. It's not about what does it look like, but how does it make people feel." Well, I know that we are all very excited to welcome Miss Jeannine Oppewall to our program. Hello.
Welcome.
Good morning to you. It's still morning there in California. So.
Yep. Sure is. I've been chasing my gardener around the backyard over the broken sprinkler issues. The perennial Southern California dreaded task.
Well, thank you for taking a little time away from the garden to join us. I want to start, if we could, going back to your early beginnings, sort of entering the family business of design, if you will, and how that transitioned into your time working for the Eames studio.
Well, I jokingly say I went into the family business. I didn't have any intention of doing that. I was going to be the family intellectual. My father was a tool and die designer for a big textile company in Massachusetts, and my brother was an engineer at Boeing, and my other brother went to Rhode Island School of Design and now is a big IT guy. So I guess I went into the family business. My mother designed one-of-a-kind doll costumes for a little department store in Massachusetts, and it comes easy for me.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I can say. Once I learned that it came easy for me, I decided, well, this was what the gods had intended. Never mind that, academic intellectuals.
Well, wouldn't you say there's still a bit of the intellectual thought that goes into your design work as well?
Well, I can't avoid that side of me. That's true. Anybody who knows me knows that. I'm full of all kinds of strange facts about odd things.
Oh, that's a good way to be.
I'm curious. I'm interested, you know?
Yeah. Curiosity keeps us going ahead. So
It's true.
Sure does.
So you found yourself in the very famous studio of Charles and Ray Eames. Could you speak to a little bit about how you wound up there and what your early assignments were?
Well, how I wound up there was a kind of a two-pronged fork.
Okay.
One, I happened to sit next to a guy in art history class who had wangled the class a visit to Herman Miller Furniture Company.
Mm-hmm.
And as it turned out, his dad was a vice president at the company. And while we were studying Eames, Saarinen, and Nelson in, I don't know, year 3 or something of art history, he leaned over to me and said, if you ever go to California, you know, I can arrange a visit for you at the office of Charles Eames. And I looked at him as the naive fool that I am. I said, oh, come on. He must be dead. We're studying him in art history. And then I remembered that when I went to California and wangled a visit to the office. And I had the same sensation walking in there that I did when I walked into the Herman Miller Furniture Factory. It was a kind of a Shakespearean moment. It was like, oh, brave new world that has such furniture in it. So on the way out the door, I asked a receptionist if there were any jobs there.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, well, as a matter of fact, we do have some jobs there. And she described very carefully what she thought I would have to do. And she said, well, you have to do some reading and research for Charles. You know, he's just been nominated by Richard Nixon to be on the, the National Endowment for the Arts Committee. I thought, okay, read, research, I know how to do that. And you have to curate the black and white slide library and the black and white film library, the negatives and the slides, the color slides, and the library, the book library. And I thought, okay, well, I can figure that out. Mm-hmm. And then she said, well, also, you have to take care of the post-production of the films. And I went, I don't know anything about post-production film.
Yeah.
So anyway, I went back and forth, meeting various guys at the office, and I could tell that most of them thought, and quite correctly, that I did not have the precise kind of design school training that most people who, went to the office had. Mm-hmm. But that didn't seem to bother Charles. He just said, when I finally got to talk to him in person about this job, he said, well, you know, I can teach someone how to draw. I cannot teach someone how to think or how to see. If you can think and you can see, you can stay here.
Right.
So I didn't really know exactly what he meant at the time, but day one on the job, I found myself on the phone with Fred Johnson at Technicolor, telling him I had the A roll and the B roll, and what the heck did I do next? He laughed in typical Los Angeles fashion. The first words out of his mouth were, "Get into your car." That's how all directions start in Los Angeles. And he told me how to get to Technicolor, and he dragged me around on a several-hour tour. Told me what I needed to know. I wrote it all down, and he looked at me as I was leaving and said, okay, now, my job is going to be a lot easier since now I've told you what your job is.
Well, there you go. It's helping
Yeah.
each other out. It makes everyone's lives easier, right?
Yeah, it does.
I learned a lot from that one moment in retrospect. If you've got somebody new and green on the job, you better pull them aside and tell them exactly what their job is. Otherwise, how are they going to know?
Yeah.
And you commented on Eames once that many designers are happy manipulating objects, and he was manipulating an idea.
Yes.
And what was it like working in such a collaborative environment where ideas were flowing, and what were the relationships like and the people?
Well, a great deal of the time that I spent there, we spent a lot of time with our colleagues discussing what were the main ideas that we needed to get across for an exhibition, let's say, and how in the world could we illustrate those ideas best.
Right.
And as a result of that background, I have to say, there are days when my frustration with the film business rises, because design in the film business, as it is in many businesses which, use designers, is often somewhat devoid of content.
Mm-hmm.
And I need a certain amount of brushing up against content in a serious way to be a functioning, happy person.
Right.
I like manipulating ideas, and if I can't find an idea in a story that appeals to me personally in a script, then I need to move on, because it's pretty much a disaster for me if I don't get some food out of it. It's not just about me feeding the beast. It's about the beast feeding me something in return.
Right. Right.
Well, I know that you shared an image with us that this was a drawing that Eames made for you.
I have to laugh every time I see that thing.
It's really from Charles.
It's sadly shop worn. One day on the weekend, because we ended up working usually, 6-7 days a week, I came in with a sweatshirt with a picture of a butterfly on it that someone had given me. And he laughed. He found it very funny. So he drew a picture of me as a speciperson, he said, with a pen through me, labeled and dated as if I were a butterfly. And it was on this crappy little scrap of paper. And he just kind of threw it at me when he was done with it. And I thought, well, I like that. That said something about me.
Well, aren't those onion skin sketches sometimes the best? You have to find those down the line and say, well, this is a great idea. And that's what matters, is the idea, right?
It was really funny. I mean, I finally dragged it out of the closet where I knew I had filed it and decided I would get it framed, because it has some emotional value for me.
Right.
Of course. And was he aware of your love of butterflies and all that?
Oh, yes. In fact, I think I am featured in one of the films. It might have been a film we made about the potential of cable TV or some other antique technology, playing with my butterfly collection.
Oh, that's
because it's, it was just an odd and interesting aspect of my personality that could be put to use.
Right.
Very good.
And your love of butterflies started with your mother, right?
Yeah, my mother won science fair projects with her butterfly collection in Florida. Actually, she was quite serious about it. And when I was a kid, she made me a butterfly net. bought me books about butterflies and birds and flowers. And so that was always, you know, part of my childhood. And I can remember the first butterfly I caught. It was by our big screened-in porch, and it was a silver-spotted skipper that had landed on the orange blossom bush. It might still be in my collection. I'm not really sure.
Wow.
It's very cool. So overall, how long, going back to Eames for just a moment, how long did you spend there in the office, and when did you make the transition out of the office into film?
Well, I think I was there for about 7 or 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was that we've been all working very, very hard through the Bicentennial Administration's exhibitions. And after that, all the money dried up for exhibition design in the country, because everybody had basically spent all the money that they had in their budgets for those kinds of things. There weren't any more for a bit. So Charles was, you know, going back to dealing with a lot of stuff that had been still on his plate that he hadn't finished from his other things on. And some of the rest of us just decided that, you know, we needed to move on rather than suck up the money in his own kitty.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people kind of disappeared at that point, and that's the point at which I decided that I should leave. And I know that at the time I understood that he didn't always take kindly to people who announced the departure.
Mm.
You know, why should he?
Right.
So I went to him and I said, you know, Charles, I've always been interested in insects. And he says, yeah, I know. I said, well, you know, I think I feel like a caterpillar who's eaten about as much of this leaf as I can possibly eat. I need to go hide for a bit and lay up under another leaf, shed my skin, and grow and see what comes out of that next. And it was my poetic way of explaining what was going on in my life and why I should probably think about doing something else. And he accepted it very graciously with a kind of a laugh. What he said at the same time was, and I can still hear the voice, don't let the standards down. And every time I get into a conflict with the producer about standards and qualities, I hear his voice in the back of my head. And it makes it utterly impossible for me to just do a bad job because, you know, they don't care about design.
Right. The spirit of Charles Eames lives on in your work.
Well, it's a formidable ghost, I have to tell you.
No, it's a great thing to carry over. It's a great asset to have. And so tell us more about this transition from Eames into working as a production designer and art director. I know in LA Confidential, you personally explored your relationship with LA. Tell us how that led to a location and design for the Victory Motel.
Well, when I read the book and when I read the script, what was described in the book and the script was an abandoned motel alongside a highway that had been formerly a highway, but was now bypassed because of the recent opening of the Route 10 Santa Monica Freeway.
Right.
From San Bernardino to the Santa Monica Pier. That's what was written. And the producer, of course, did not want to spend any money building a motel. He was certain that there was one out there. So I said, okay, I will spend a day or so driving old Route 66 between San Bernardino and Ventura, and I will come back and tell you what I find. So I did the drive. I found one a little motel that you could kind of photograph without a whole lot of modernity around it, in Rialto, which is near San Bernardino. I have no idea if the place still exists or not.
Right.
But it was not what I would call photogenic, and I knew the producer wouldn't want to shoot there because it's like an hour and a half drive from Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And then I kept going, and I found one other motel worse than unphotographable in the valley somewhere, the San Fernando Valley. And I came back and I showed him the pictures, and I said, well, I don't know what to tell you. It ain't out there.
Right.
So he growled and didn't say anything. And then I went to bed that night, and I thought, well, okay, now it's my responsibility to come up with a new idea because I pretty much killed the old one. So I was getting into bed that night and just kind of going through the images in my head of my first experiences in Los Angeles. Because I'd never, been out of the East Coast or the Midwest before that.
Right.
And I landed in LAX and drove with some friends north through the Stalker oil fields to Hollywood. And as we were driving through the oil fields, I thought, what in the world? There's still oil fields working in this city? What kind of place is this? So I remembered that image, and I thought, well, that's a very kind of primal image that I have of Los Angeles. I can't be the only person with that image. So I called Curtis Hanson, who was the director, and I said, Curtis, I had an idea last night that maybe I should look in the Stalker oil fields for a place to build the motel.
Right.
And he immediately understood that. He got it. He thought that was a great idea. So the location manager, John Panzarella, spent a couple of weeks getting permission for us to drive around the Stalker oil fields. And we did. We drove around, dodging the oil tankers. And finally came to this one area, which was a flat spot. And what I loved about it was you could approach it only from one direction. It was a dead end in front. There was a small hill to the right and a very deep barranca to the left, or basically a giant natural form ditch. And really, really deep. And in the background, you could see those little oil towers sucking away. And it turned out to be the perfect metaphor, I thought, for what was going on in the story. It's a story about corruption in Los Angeles and how corruption is sucking the city dry. And there you have it when the cops drive up into the location of the motel. What you see is the oil well sucking the city dry in the background.
Amazing.
So it was a lot of bang for the buck metaphor.
Yes. So you touch on something very important with the metaphor of the design, which is in film design, it's your responsibility to really pull out the emotion of the story as well as the physical world in which these characters live, right?
Right. I mean, in the best of all possible worlds, the most important sets should have some metaphor in them that speaks about what's going on in the story, not just in that scene at that particular moment, but what is the whole story trying to tell us? What's it saying? And you've got to find a visual way to represent that story on screen.
Yeah. I know going back to Tender Mercies, you had another motel. We don't have an image of it, but in your process of figuring out exactly the layout of the motel, you really channeled the idea of a human embrace, right?
I did. I was sure when that film came out, I would get calls from all kinds of people saying, "You fool, Nobody lays a motel out in a Y shape. Because I had, again, driven old Route 66 from Dallas to Fort Worth and looked at all the motels that were there and photographed the old ones. And they were either U-shaped, straight lines, or L-shaped. There's no such thing as Y-shaped motel. But it seemed that wasn't going to further the cause to me. I mean, the story really is about why you would embrace a strange kind of company in a lonely, windswept place like this. So it seemed to me that the best way to put that out there was some kind of a Y-shaped embrace. And, nobody complained about it, so I learned a very big lesson. Just do it.
Just do it. Well, it's really great to hear that story now, because we all need hugs now more than ever.
The virtual hug isn't doing it, kid.
No. And
if we could actually, Alan, if we could bring up that image again, I just want to, before we jump ahead, I want to spend a little time with this sketch here. And if you might be able to tell us, this is a beautiful watercolor. I know that you often do watercolors for your films. Can you speak a little bit to the importance of these sketches in your process in communicating a design?
Well, it takes me a little while to figure out exactly what I want to do. But in this case, I knew that it was called the Victory Motel, and I needed to go back to some imagery from World War II, which I did, the big V and the banner that says Victory Motel. I wanted a motel that was older than logically it might have needed to be. So I went back to the idea of the 1920s motels, where what you see are the little garage doors next to the main entrance to the motel. And what you did was you opened up those doors and you snuck your car in there, because in the 1920s, when you were traveling and staying in a motel, keeping your car safe was very important. We don't care about them in exactly the same way now that people cared about their cars then. So that was an important consideration. And I also like to do little scribbles on the side and say, and to just outline things. So just say, it needs to look like there's eucalyptus stain on the roof. The awning has to be metal, not wood, not awning material. Basically, approximately what color it should be. That I want, like that. There's a sway back in the roof line. That kind of thing. It's just making some little notes that make some of the ideas a little bit more clear.
Right.
And I know in this one in particular, you made the camera department very happy with the addition of that garage, right?
Yeah. I did, because it wasn't just that garage. I mean, the motels on the other side, I think there are 2 or 3 other rooms, opened up. And the camera department just shoved all their equipment into those garage spaces day one, and then never had to import the big trucks again, by and large. So that it was a clever solution to everybody's problem. I always tell people that you're not just designing the sets, you're taking into consideration what other people need in order to do their best work as well. And it's your job to help them figure out how they can do their best work.
Absolutely.
And it happened to be a pretty good solution to a camera department problem, because getting up and down with big trucks, motion picture trucks, on those dirt roads in conflict with the oil tankers was not easy.
I can't imagine.
No, and you usually come on to you're one of the first on to the job.
Yeah.
How do you do you foresee problem? If we're reading the script, you add backstory, do you help you navigate through some challenges that might come ed. How do you handle that?
Well, I think the job of the design department is to remember that we get there first.
Mm-hmm.
And it's our responsibility to set a very high bar so that other people are inspired by it and feel that it would be remiss of them to fall below that standard.
Right.
That's kind of basically how I think about it.
Right.
So let's jump ahead to another project. This is Pleasantville. And Pleasantville is one of my personal favorites of your work. And one thing that really serves as a poetic device in this film is color. So let's talk a little bit about the metaphor of color in Pleasantville. It starts in this monochromatic world, and little bits of color are introduced once you enter the television world. Can you speak to that process of collaborating with the writers and directors and figuring out how are we going to pull these little pieces out?
That was a difficult kind of trial and error process. I think in the beginning, we had this illusion that we might be able to shoot it in black and white and add the color.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And then that wasn't working out at all because no processing plants processing black and white film very well at the moment. So it turned out to be better to shoot it in color and then strip out the color.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very complicated process and went back and forth for a long time. My main problem had to do with making sure that things looked as good in black and white as they did in color.
Okay.
And what you quickly find out is that you cannot juxtapose a green and a red of equal value next to each other, because in color you would know the difference, but in black and white they will look exactly the same.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a process of understanding how naturalistically, although completely manipulated, of course, to put different colors and patterns and values next to each other. So when it was shot and looking in black and white, it would look great. But when it switched to color, it would look just as good, just as natural, just as believable.
Right.
And the only way I learned how to do this, because I'm kind of a slow learner and I wasn't watching a bunch of old black and white TV shows to sort of see what they did. It was back in the olden days, I carried around one idiot camera with black and white film and one idiot camera with color film, and we get them both processed and put them next to each other and say, oh, that's how you have to do it.
Right.
So that was my primary challenge.
Well, that's an exciting process of discovery. I know if we look at some of these old, like the old Addams Family, there's some images that were released of the set, black and white television program, but a color photo of the set, and it was really a mishmash of different colors. So I do imagine the contrast thing it's really all about that, right? When you're establishing the scape. So let's take a look here at the soda shop. This is another one of your watercolors that we're exploring again with your notes and everything. These are kind of great. A great deal of character in these sketches, by the way.
Yeah.
Well, the first time I talked to Gary Ross about the story, what was really important and interesting, it seemed to me, is that he kept talking about the town hall as the seat of conservative authority. And he kept talking about the soda shop as the seat of rebellious sedition.
Mm.
Okay,
Great.
so that gave me pretty much all I needed to know about how to design these two things. The soda shop needed to have color. It needed to sparkle. It needed to be shiny. It needed to be attractive. And the town hall really needed to have some kind of a socialist, hard-ass kind of stone, classical, neoclassical hangover.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And so there was a big contrast between those two things. And between those two buildings, you pretty much have the metaphor for what the story's about.
Right, right. Can you tell us about the paintings? Jeff Daniels' character runs the soda shop, and he's inspired by a book that Tobey Maguire's character brings to him. Go ahead and tell us about the painting.
The paintings were done by different artists.
Mm-hmm.
The first one, which was the Cubist Santa Claus, was done by one of our in-house sketch artists who did such a fanciful, wonderful job of it that we decided nobody could do it any better. So we got him to do that one. Then I think there was this one and the next one, the Betty paintings were done by an artist up in, I think, Ojai area, whose work Gary had seen somewhere, and she turned out to be very lovely, created the original paintings, and we had our own artist, scenic artists, basically paint them on the glass and the windows and whatever we needed that way. And the final painting, the giant mural on the side of the police station, was done by my friend Frank Romero, who is one of the most important Chicano artists in Los Angeles. He was a member of this group called Los Four.
Mm.
And Frank and I had worked together at the Eames office.
That's wonderful.
So I knew him, I knew his work, and I knew this was a script that he would really relate to. So I sent him the story, and he, of course, did a proposal for a mural that was perfect. If you look at that mural, you will see that he got everything about the story. The kiss, the records, the books being burned and flying up to book heaven, the large bowling ball coming to mow down the small members of the population. Everything about that story, metaphorically and visually, he packed into that one mural. He is very good at that kind of thing.
Wow.
And it had this real middle American mock you kind of flavor to it.
Mm-hmm.
So it was great for me to be able to work with someone who I knew really well to get that mural produced.
Mm.
Absolutely.
I know we spent a little time before this show talking about the natural origin of pigment and color. And I know that's a very important part of all the work that you do. So not just when color is the focus, like in Pleasantville, but in any script that you read, are you always thinking in color from day one? Do you associate different characters with colors?
Yes and no. I mean, I mostly start by thinking of it as kind of an overall color scheme. For instance, in Catch Me If You Can, I realized that the guy began his life in a rather monochromatic existence. It got even more chaotically monochromatic. And then it started heating up and becoming bright and super colorful. And in the end, he goes back to who he was sort of in the beginning, which is monochromatic, but in a more organized fashion.
Mm.
Right.
And that's the way that I think about it in terms of a film, mostly in terms of the story.
Right.
I'm also a big believer in the fact that there can be too many colors in a film. I like a very limited color scheme.
Absolutely.
And I like to play with variations on that color scheme.
Right.
Very good.
It just seems to make the most sense to me, because that way you control something about the emotions and the ideas of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Here we have this Catch Me If You Can for your consideration card. And there's a wonderful little blurb here. The production team immerses us in the architecture, fashions, music, and attitudes of the era. Production designer Jeannine Oppewall has fun with notions of immediate pre-hippie era cool.
Well, I love this ad. Someone gave me a copy of it, and for a while I had it framed in my studio.
Uh-huh. It is lovely.
But what's great about the credits, the pre-title credits to this film, is that it harks back to the days of Saul Bass's simple graphic design for titles. And the thing about his title design is it always told you metaphorically and visually something about what was coming up.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that's what I loved about the about this little ad. It has color, it has music, it has a little hint about what's coming up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Really
similar
fantastic.
to the mural in Pleasantville.
Yep.
And I know that, first and foremost, you're servicing the script and the director's vision, but how do you bring your own voice to the story? Is there anything that you include on set or?
Well, the surprising thing is that many directors, surprise, surprise, don't really have a strong vision.
Right.
And that's fine for me, because my feeling is that, in fact, maybe that's better. It's better for me to take responsibility for figuring that out. If a director can just tell me one or two ideas that he or she has about basically what moves them about this story, I'll go for the rest. I'm never very good at taking strict direction anyway. I never have been, and it's not going to start happening now. So that's kind of my feeling. I'm happiest with someone who just has a few sentences to say about what their ideas are, and then let me hang myself with the rest of my own ideas about it, and I'll double check back and forth. I'm thinking about this. What do you think? But I have also learned that it's important to manipulate the director's ideas. I mean, it was very funny when I was working with Gary Ross. I learned to show him 3 ground plans of the same set and talk him through the 3 ground plans. And there was obviously one that I liked the best. And I would say, of course, this is, you can tell me how you see the characters and their movements. And he stopped me and he said, oh, wait a minute. I get it. Director manipulates actors. Designer manipulates director. And I smiled sweetly and I looked at him and I said, but Gary, what took you so long to figure that out?
That's great. I love that.
To everything. I want to bring up a Catch Me If You Can, shot from Catch Me If You Can, which is in the TWA, the iconic Saarinen design TWA Terminal. So here's an interesting kind of small world connection to your time at the Eames office. Charles and Eero Saarinen collaborated on some furniture designs. Can you speak to bringing the TWA Terminal into the film and some of the challenges involved?
Yeah. Well, Charles and Eero, as Charles always said, Eero Saarinen was my best friend. I didn't see him sometimes for years, but that didn't mean he still wasn't my best friend.
Right.
So I thought, oh, that's interesting. You don't have to see your best friend every day. You just have to know that there's a deep communication that's possible when you do. So Catch Me If You Can had several airports in it. And basically, I went to every small airport and every airport that could possibly be available in Southern California to use for the film. And in fact, I got so desperate, I went to look at the Catalina boat terminal. And I thought, okay, another couple $100,000, this would be fine. And then I thought, well, we have to go to New York anyway, because there are things that can't be substituted in Los Angeles. And I know that the TWA terminal was closed down and had been so for a while. And I thought, well, let's just talk to the location people in New York and ask them to tell the Port Authority we want to shoot there, because the Port Authority was in charge of the terminal. And of course, I was familiar with Ezra Stoller's original photographs of the terminal when it was first built. And went there with those in mind. And of course, was horrified when I got in there to see how dirty it was, how long it had been since it was cleaned, how neglected some of the furniture was, and how much work actually had to be done to make the place look like we had done nothing.
Right.
So basically, I think we were the first film after 9/11 to move into shooting in Manhattan. And that was an important emotional event for everyone. And for me, it was emotional, of course, to go to the Saarinen terminal and find its best aspects to put on film. And it was very, very funny, because a year or so after the film came out, I got a call from Eric Saarinen, who informed me in no uncertain terms that the color of the carpet in the tunnel was all wrong. And I said, I've been waiting for somebody to call me and tell me the color is wrong. I know what color it was originally, but where was I going to get the extra $10,000 to change that long expanse of carpet? I wasn't. Have you been? Plus, that tunnel was a really important image for me, because it spoke about, the rebirth of this kid going yet again through another kind of birth tunnel to come out the other end and understand that he had to go back through it to return to any kind of a life. And it just kind of sits there as an open image with nobody going through it except the guy and his father figure, Leo and his father figure, Tom. And it really said a lot about what was going on in the film, what was going on in terms of the story. So I was, really happy to have found that for the film.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Have you been back since they've remodeled TWA?
No, but I will make a pilgrimage there.
Very good.
I guarantee you I'll make a pilgrimage, and I'll have some things to say. The New York Times called us, and I think they called me because I, had been the one working with the Port Authority in that building, and they said, well, the Port Authority wants to tear this down. And I said, oh yeah, they've told me that as a terminal, it never worked. And they would be, if it had to be a terminal again, they would just as soon get rid of it. And I was a bit horrified by that. So not having any fear of reprisal, I just said what I thought. It would be crazy not to preserve this thing, because it was a memorial to the way we used to think about flying, the freedom, the emotional expression, everything about flying that we used to think great thoughts about in the early days of mass airplane transit is embodied there in that building.
Absolutely.
And it's amazing. You have to keep something like that so people can look at it and remember the joy of flying before it came the fear of flying.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's true. It's like a different era in time. And, you've transported us in time on many occasions. And another one of those films was Seabiscuit. And we'd like to know just how important historical accuracy is. Like, do you make certain allowances to knowingly veer from the period if it serves the character, or?
My basic rule of thumb is when it comes to a piece of set dressing, for example, you can do research, and so let's say you find out that a certain lamp is actually been designed but not manufactured around the time that your film is meant to take place. But you keep looking at that lamp and thinking, but that's the thing that tells everybody about that era best.
Right.
Mm.
And my position is that then you should use it.
Right.
And not be a slave to absolute authenticity. The slave of authenticity is the academic. It is not the film designer. That's not our job. Our job is to create images and emotions and environments on screen. It's not to write footnotes.
Right.
It's a different business.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I admit I've made mistakes and used English furniture when I probably should have used French. But, there's only so much you can control in this life.
Right.
That's for sure.
It
We have
is.
a sketch here from another one of your beautiful watercolors. This one from Seabiscuit. It'll come up in just a moment. There we go. The Ridgewood House.
Yeah.
Ooh, yeah.
That whole house was built.
Yeah. And that moment, when cast and crew arrive on your set for the first time is always really special. Could you tell us more about the Ridgewood House, the building of that, and what was the initial response from cast when they arrived on set and saw that?
Jeff, who plays, the main guy who owns the horse, walked into the set and looked all around. He thought it was just great. And he made a beeline for me. And he said, can I buy this house? Can you afford it? And I kind of gently took him around the back door and turned him around. And I said, well, what do you think? And the whole back of the place is, of course, nothing but sheets of plywood. And he looked at it and he said, oh, you built this? And I said, yeah, so I can't really send it to you in Montana, but I know where you can get a really good set of plans. So that was sort of the story. I mean, there was a lot of research that went into that, including looking at pictures of the original Ridgewood, but really we were going more for a kind of a Will Rogers, early California ranch style place that was a bit, evocative of what we wanted to say about the era and the place and the time. So that's why it has this clapboard and, dark red detailing.
Mm-hmm.
It's really stunning.
Well, it was built in a field.
Yeah.
Over a Christmas holiday, as I recall.
Huh. Who doesn't love a set you could call home, So speaking of home, you've been spending a lot of time at home, like all of us have.
It's so not my nature.
I understand.
My friends keep calling me and saying, are you doing okay? I know you usually just come home and in a month you get all this stuff around the house taken care of, and then you fly off to a different part of the world to go exploring. And I said, no, can we just not talk about that?
Oh.
Yeah.
So how have you been staying creative during this time?
Well, I have to tell you that I think back to something that Charles said again, and I'm going to paraphrase it. Someone once asked him something about, his creative day. And he said, well, you have to understand that I spend most of my time, maybe even 90% of my time, doing the stuff that I have to do in order to get to the place where I can actually do real work. And I understand that now that I've become an adult, because in order to get to the place where you can actually do real work, you have to clear the thickets.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
There's all this stuff that you just have to take care of so your life doesn't come to a grinding bureaucratic halt.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of what it is. You spend a lot of time laying the groundwork. So when you can hop onto the next thing, your mind is free and ready to do that.
Right.
And I think that that's what a lot of people have been doing right now, is to just, who was it that said it's necessary to tend your garden? And I don't mean just the literal garden. I mean the garden that's inside of you, where things grow. They needs food, it needs water, it needs sunshine, it needs rain, it needs flowers.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That's kind of, I think that's kind of the way that people need to stay, to keep their creative spirits alive. You have to find little things every day that give you pleasure and hold on to them.
Right. Yeah.
It's a wise way to spend time for sure. We got a question from Serbia, Christina. Jeannine, can you please answer? Is that an embroidery hoop behind you? Do you do embroidery?
No, it's a very odd Italian lamp. It's rice paper and something that looks like an embroidery hoop. Probably was inspired by some kind of embroidery hoop. And behind that, there's a tiny little light bulb, and you turn it on, and it has this very moon-like, soft rice paper glow.
Oh, cool. Love that. Very cool.
They had a great exhibit last time I was at the Noguchi Museum in Queens, New York. The beautiful room full of these paper lanterns with that warm, homely glow. And while we're talking about your surroundings, I do also want to ask you about the painting. It's been striking to me during this whole conversation. Could you shed some light on what that is?
Yeah, that's I did a little film called The Face of Love with Annette Bening.
Mm-hmm.
And in it, she goes into an exhibition by an artist who specializes in painting pictures of people in swimming pools. And the woman who we found, I think she came from San Luis Obispo, did the paintings for us. She had a beautiful, graphic, colorful style that related to water and the story very well. And she came down with the whole, truckload of paintings, and we arranged them in the exhibit, the art gallery. And there was one or two left over, and this was one that was left over. And she more or less insisted that I take it home.
Mm-hmm.
So I took it home, and here it is. And it has a kind of a Hopper-esque feeling.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Which I love, but it's actually, I think, something like a contemporary sushi bar in San Luis Obispo, but it has something very evocative about it that I like living with it.
It does.
Yeah,
And, it seems all too apropos right now, because I remember at the beginning of this quarantine, I saw several Hopper paintings. And there was sort of this trend of people coming together saying, it really feels like we're living in a Hopper painting right now. The
Yes.
solidarity of it, and perhaps there's some peace in all that too, right?
Well, it's certainly a quiet space,
Mm.
and it's a lonely space.
Right.
And it's also one of those paintings that you look at it and you start imagining a scenario. It's like walking into the best locations.
Ah,
Right.
yes.
Walk into them and you can imagine something about the story taking place there. It's like the place comes to you and says, take me. I need to be in your story.
Yeah,
And that's how I feel about this particular painting. I took it and it needs to be in my story.
it's beautiful. And
It is.
speaking of imagining, and given all this, what do you hope for the future of the industry?
Well, it's a murky crystal ball at the moment.
Right.
Everybody's waiting for the studios and the producers and the unions and the guilds to get together and put out their ideas of how we're going to go back to work.
Right.
And we don't know. It's a lot of rumors right now, but people are hard at work on it. I think one of the problems that the art department is going to have is how in the world do we as a construction, paint, design, decorating, set dressing, shopping, location scouting department, how do we function? How do we intersect with the shooting crew? Because as we all know, the top priority is the actors and the people immediately around them. It's not us.
Right.
But nevertheless, they don't have a film if we don't find the right locations. And how are we supposed to find them immediately COVID-free? No one knows. How are we going to shop only online? You can't only find locations online. You can't only shop online.
Right.
If you only shop online, your film will look like an IKEA workshop. You know, that's just the way it is. So if you want to do a good job, there's going to be a lot of potential conflicts and a lot of anxiety and a lot of blundering around. And no one really sure how locations and set dressing are going to work.
Right.
You know, surely there will be some suggestions, and I would hope that two of them are not find the locations only online and choose them that way and only shop online, because
right.
I don't know anybody in the art department who thinks they could do a very satisfactory job that way unless the script is written specifically for those kinds of conditions.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It also takes away from the intuitive process of the location scouting, and it takes away from a lot of what you need to do.
Yeah, it's as I said, it's all very confusing right now, and hopefully there'll be some clarity, and then there'll be a lot of experimentation, and just have to find out how it works.
Right.
Mm-hmm. It might be the beginnings of a new Renaissance period, so we will see. Well, hope is a good thing to have.
Yeah, and you have to be ready to think of different ways of doing things and make the outrageous suggestion. You know, like, okay, I'm not finding this damn motel. Now we're going to go to the stock. You know, it's that you have to be ready to make those kinds of crazy leaps.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so we'll see.
We will see. Well, an hour has come and gone.
Woo!
It's time for us all to go back to tending our garden.
Yes.
Thank you so very much, Jeannine. This was such a delight, and I know everyone was excited to see you on here today as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hey, bye. Thank you, guys. See you later.
Bye.
Talk to you later.
All right, very good. Well, everyone, time for you all to get back to your Wednesdays. As always, I hope everyone is safe and healthy. Karen, go ahead and tell us about who is coming to join us on Saturday.
Sure, and it was such a pleasure having Jeannine. And Saturday, we're looking forward to having production designer and director Tracy Hayes. Tracy has dozens of credits as a production designer and art director. These include the series Dead Girls Detective Agency, Gabrielle's Inferno, Painkillers, and the upcoming feature A Nice Girl Like You, which is one of the projects I had the pleasure of collaborating with Tracy on. And next week, we'll dive into the unique position of being a designer and director, as well as Tracy's relationship with Passionflix, where she's worked on a large number of films. So we look forward to Saturday.
Indeed, we do. Everyone be well. We'll see you then. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Be safe.